here's the thing. First question, is there a managed way out of lockdown? I was getting a right royal pasting last night. I was telling Mike Graham earlier on social media. It was all very, very unfair, by the way, but I mean, always good fun to josh with the impenetrable and some of the dead wood out there. It was all based on the phone-in we did yesterday about anti-vaxxers. And I think, well, at least I thought during the show, we made the very obvious distinction between somebody who simply doesn't want to have a vaccine. That's not what I would call an anti-vaxxer. And somebody who makes up dangerous and offensive lies about vaccines. They're two very completely different things. And it was the latter, obviously, that we were going for, the jugular of the Piers Corbyns of this world, with their nonsense claims of DNA changing, track and trace inducing, tail growing, two-head producing viruses, and all manner of other nonsense. So it was that group of people that, we were attacking. I think most of us would attack that. The science is in broad agreement. I know there are detractors, broad agreement on this stuff. And you'd have to really be advancing something monumental, intellectually game-changing to counter what the world of science, every epidemiologist and virologist and microbiologist, doctor, clinician, scientist, laboratory-based engineer, laboratory-based even engineer, or even a lavatory-based engineer. Everybody, I think, who's in this picture is in broad agreement on where we're at with all of this. The one thing that we can't get a broad agreement on, however, is easing of the lockdown. That seems to be a little more tricky. Now, having had this right royal pasting from the dead wood on social media, I put out another tweet, and I think it stopped a few people in their tracks, because I think we live in this curious world, don't we? That if you have one view, then it's assumed you have a shed load of others that are in a similar vein. Or you must therefore, in the binary way we now apparently do business, if you think one thing or don't think what somebody else agrees with, then you must be very much at the polar opposite. There's no nuance, there's no grey areas in all of this. So I put out a tweet and it said this: I'm watching businesses around me crumble. I'm seeing hard-working people lose their livelihoods. I'm seeing the strong broken and the weak without hope. I'm seeing sick people unable to be treated. This country cannot remain locked down for much longer. And each of the points in that, I know personally, as many of you will do as well, people who are affected in all of those categories. And I think most of us now have got to that stage. And you almost don't want to dwell on it because it's so darn depressing. And I think we're all feeling it to a greater or a lesser extent, depending on your circumstances. So I cannot be the only person in the UK who's conflicted by this. There are two sets of headlines out there just to compound the confusion. Firstly, we've got news that we now have the lowest, or did have up to yesterday, the lowest daily figures for about 6 weeks. I saw Piers Morgan tweeting. He said, UK records 406 more COVID deaths. This was from yesterday. 18,000 cases. These are both the lowest daily rises for 6 weeks. The lockdown is working, said Piers Morgan. I would gently suggest that if you lock people away for a long period of time, then as sure as night follows day, you will see cases reduce, right? I don't think there's anything weird about that. But what we do know from what's happened before, when you open up again, you end up back to where you were unless you lock down for longer. Now we're seeing the other part of this story, worrying headlines about this South African strain, door-to-door testing going on in various parts of the country, from the north to the south. The jury seems to be out on just how virulent this new strain is, but the smart money suggests that it might not be pretty. So here we are again. Lockdown is working, we are told, but a new strain is sneaking its way around the place. It doesn't take a genius to work out that our political handlers ain't about to end lockdown anytime soon. 0344 499 1000. Is there a managed way out of lockdown? And I draw your attention. Did you see this story from Perth in Australia? This is absolutely extraordinary. Now, I'm not really a supporter of direct comparisons. When people bring up the New Zealand, all that they did in New Zealand, and it worked for New Zealand. It was right for New Zealand. The advice across not just this country, anywhere else in the world, was very different to to what we were getting then and what New Zealand and Australia then went on to do. But in Perth, in Australia, so it's a city of 2 million people, they were already in a state of be careful, watch. So they were kind of out of lockdown. They were going about their business, social distancing. I think when they were still wearing masks and stuff, but essentially the lockdown was over. And one man, who, as I understand it, I think he was working in security on a kind of like a quarantine hotel. So one man got coronavirus, just one bloke, and I think he posted something on Facebook. And the whole city went into lockdown. Schools, restaurants, bars, cinemas, gyms, everything. One man got the COVIDs and the whole city went into lockdown. This is how they're dealing. 2 million people, along with people living in nearby areas as well, must stay at home. We never did that. Most other countries never did that. Johnson was even advised against doing that from his own task force, if you remember back then. It was advised and said at the time that it would make little or no difference. So where does this leave us? So we look at Australia and we think, okay, if you did that, then lockdown works. And I know systems are different. Lockdown would work, right? Based on that. But I cannot remove myself. I can't extrapolate a positive headline out of the grim reality that people are dying in other ways. Businesses are dying. Lives are getting decimated. People can't get treatment. Mental health, I would suggest, has never been more challenged as it's currently being right now. And I can't be the only bloke on the planet who's conflicted by that. So I understand it. If we just unlocked everything right now, within a month, we'd have 3 times the amount of people in hospital and more people would die. It's not the flu, okay? I know in the Venn diagram, there are interesting correlations, and if you were writing a paper on it, you'd be kicked out of medical school if you didn't introduce those correlations, because they are relevant. But when people say, well, it's just the flu, that kind of writes it off and suggests there isn't a level of importance you attach to it. Of course there's a level of importance. People have died with COVID. Some people will have died of COVID, I'm sure. Most people, I would imagine, looking at the statistics, died with COVID. So they might have died of something else, but the COVID accelerated perhaps their death. It meant they died sooner than they would have perhaps been expected to, given their underlying health conditions. Whatever the reasons, if this country was unlocked right now, bang, we would have within 1 month more people in hospital, yeah? I think we all know that. And therefore we'd have more people hooked up to ventilators, and therefore we'd have more people who would die. Whatever you think of the terminology, with COVID, off COVID, etc., I think we could agree that when you see those daily figures announced, there would be more of them. And we do have an excess death rate, I get that. However, squaring that with the unimaginable, imagine telling this story a year ago. Imagine February the 2nd last year, when this was just bubbling away. If I'd said, do you know what, the UK is going to be locked down for the best part of a year, and businesses will close, and people will be on furlough, and pubs and restaurants will never open, and some shops will never open again, and businesses will go by the wayside, and your kids will miss a year of school, and people will struggle to feed their families because they haven't got the right kind of money coming in, and mental health will take an absolute bashing, not just because people might be losing their livelihoods or their businesses or their jobs, but because they are in a lockdown, a perpetual prison, if you like. Now, given these two incredibly powerful headlines, I get the COVID thing, but I also, and I think we all should, and I'm not hearing enough about this from the government. I very rarely hear the government and our political masters acknowledge the true severity of the effects of lockdown. There has to be a managed way out of this, a managed way out of this. Nobody is suggesting, bang, you just open up. We know where that would lead. There has to be a managed way out of this.